Okay, so beginning of day 21 with the meat chickens. Last count on the flock was 423. As I'm scanning the chicken pen, I think things look good this morning. From the outside looking in, I think our number is still 423. I sure hope so. So immediately, as we are in the barn moving around, open up a door, sunlight is coming in, we start talking. I'll be actually going into their grower space. They start to respond to that activity. So they'll be up moving around, and immediately we see the things that need taken care of. So waters need filled again. So something interesting with meat birds, before I pause the recording and start doing the chores on their floor space, that I want to show you and share with you, because if you raise them, you'll probably experience something similar. Depending on how your birds use the floor space can impact which feeders and waters get utilized the most and which feeders and waters empty ahead of the rest of the feeders and waters. We had all the heat lamps off during the daytime on day 20. We hoped to be able to keep them off overnight, but the temperature dropped down to 55 degrees and was going to probably go to about 50, and we knew that was lower than their comfort zone of about 80. So by 11 p.m., we had gone ahead and plugged all the heat lamps back in. With that being the case, that attracted most of the birds back over here to the heat lamps, and we had a long feeder in the corner and a long feeder here, and we have these three waters here. So this morning, those three waters and those two feeders are empty because the birds were concentrated here, but they were close enough to food and water to continue to use it, so they used those first. Whereas the waters on the other side of the pen, they'll utilize them during the daytime when we have the heat lamps off and when we have the doors open and when they spread out throughout the pen more. But from overnight, those are still totally full because the birds didn't go over there when it was cooler and they wanted to stay closer to the blanket of warmth that we create with the heat lamps. So likewise with the feed, those feed trays that they had easy access to near their preferred ambient conditions, those were emptied. Most of these feeders are not emptied yet. So I'll go ahead and cut the video. Let me get their water. That's important, and get the other doors open. And then a couple more points I want to tell you, especially a point about the feed. Okay, so a little redistribution in the pen here from the birds. The thing I wanted to tell you about feed is quantity. So we are halfway through production. We aim for a 42-day production cycle. We have processing date set for these birds of June 11th, 2025. This is May 20th that we're recording, May 20th, 2025. So they do have 21 more days and they're on day 21. So we are halfway through production. So we've distributed a third of the total feed we expect them to use for all of production. So halfway through production, they've consumed about a third of the total feed ration they need for the whole time. And that's right on target. And in the next half of production, they will definitely consume the other 2/3 of the feed ration. When we start a flock, we go into it knowing that we expect each bird on average to eat about 10 pounds from start to finish per bird. So we just take 10 and we multiply it by the number of birds that we plan to take to the processor, and that tells us how much feed we're going to need minimum for the flock. Then if we're starting more birds, then we put in a reservation for it at the processor. We multiply that number times 10, and that's the number of pounds of feed that we have on farm when we start the flock. So in this case, we ordered 425 chicks, so we planned on 4,250 pounds of feed, start to finish, and they've consumed a third of it. So That's good. They're right on target. I find pretty consistent. About a third of the feed has been fed by halfway through production. And then from here, even though we have more feed to feed out than we've already fed, as they grow, their appetite compounds and they want more food. So whereas as of yesterday, we have seen a pattern where they're consuming as a flock 100 pounds of feed in a day. We're going to reach a point where they're consuming 200 pounds of feed in a day. And so actually, as we go through the second half of production, we're still going to be watching how are they doing on feed consumption rate. At what rate are they eating it? And if we see it turn a corner where they're eating through it faster than the supply is going to last till the end, then we'll start to look at, okay, well, what's their growth like? And do we need to ration it? Can they tolerate that? Or are they demanding more food and we're going to have to go get more feedstuffs? We opened up the big doors and I had refilled the waters. I moved the tray feeders. I distributed some feed out of these metal feeders into those trays. As we did all that, the birds gravitated over this way. So during the daytime, they'll utilize the pen more uniformly and they'll be over on this side of the pen drinking from these waters and eating from these feeders. And when they rest, they may go back over there to rest because they're kind of used to resting there. It's kind of imprinted on them, but they will have this routine of every few hours getting up, going to feeders and waters. And so back on that first point where we saw all the birds over here and we talked about how the resources that were over here near their preferred ambient conditions got utilized first. And then what the birds would have done, presumably, is just stayed over here where they like the ambient conditions. If ambient conditions didn't change in order to compel them to seek out resources throughout the rest of their floor space, they would have prioritized the warmth. Now, we are supposed to get up to about 70 degrees Fahrenheit today. And with that temperature and the quantity of birds in here on the floor space and the body heat they leverage from that and the heat that's coming up off of the floor from it having absorbed manure load from the flock, 70 degrees Fahrenheit is going to be satisfactory for this flock. But when it was 50 degrees Fahrenheit, that wasn't really satisfactory for this flock. But they are eating really well. We're really happy to see that. When you're raising meat birds, they get accused frequently of being so gluttonous. Oh, all they do is eat. All they want to do is sit around and eat. Well, as a producer, that's what you want to see. You want to see them eating all the time, really. Because we only have 6 weeks that we're going from a chicken the size of an egg to a chicken about 7-8 pounds live weight. And we need that growth to happen in that time frame in order to produce a whole frozen chicken that's about 5 pounds. So we need to see them eating. So you'll probably never hear a poultry producer that's raising these birds in order to market the meat complain about how much the birds eat, because we know the correlation is they've got to eat it. They've got to eat it to produce what we need to produce from them. 400, turns out 422 birds. We did have a flock loss overnight from day 20 to day 21. Interestingly, it was a bird that was noticeably bigger than most of the birds in the flock. So in that regard, it would lead me to believe they're at a growth spurt. That bird must have hit a big growth spurt and its heart had distress handling the demands internally of that growth spurt. So that's a possibility. So we're at 422 now. As you saw in the beginning, with that example of pointing out resource distribution throughout the pen and ambient conditions throughout the pen, we do have to be mindful of how the feeders and waters are distributed and the placement of them and the birds' interaction with them, and how the conditions, whether they're uniform or lacking uniformity, or how they change throughout a 24-hour period in our particular resources. We always have to be mindful of that because it's going to definitely impact our birds going to the feeders, going to the waters, and it's critical to keep them going to the feeders and going to the waters. So we want to avoid situations where they're prioritizing ambient conditions so much that they don't go to their resources. So thanks for joining us, y'all. Put any questions or comments in there, and we love to read your feedback. But halfway to poultry production with this group of 422, and they'll produce top quality poultry when the production cycle is finished. But that is how real chicken is made.